Okay, so I did want to briefly mention that many of the materials from this presentation are adapted from Dialogica, Thinking Through Voyant, which is written by Jeffrey Rockwell and Stefan Sinclair. And this is a really great tool if you're not aware. It's a series of, they're called walkthroughs, kind of introducing you to Voyant. So if you get something out of this and you want to go further, I can send people the link to those series. You can also adapt them yourself for teaching Voyant. Okay, so without further ado, what is Voyant Tools? So I have a short video actually that I want to play for you. That was recorded by the creator of Voyant Tools, Stefan Sinclair, and let me share my sound as well. I'm gonna have to remember how to do that. Share sound, okay. Yeah, so I like to start with this video because, of course, as many of you probably know, Stefan is no longer with us, and I think it's really important that we honor his legacy, and I also just like this video. So I'm just gonna, and it's very short, it's a nice introduction, so I'm going to play this for you all now.
My name is Stefan Sinclair. I'm a prof at McGill University in Canada, and I'm a co-creator of Voyant Tools, along with my colleague Jeffrey Rockwell at the University of Alberta. During this very short video, we'll provide a quick introduction to some of the functionality and design of Voyant Tools. Voyant is intended as a user-friendly platform that allows you to work with text that you provide, either as posted text, one or more URLs, or uploaded documents. You can also open one of the existing corpora, such as the works of Jane Austen. Right from this first screen, you are encouraged to think about high-frequency terms, and you can explore how specific terms vary across the corpus, in this case, over the course of Jane Austen's writing career. Once you find words of interest, you can drill down to the individual occurrence and view the terms in context. It may also be interesting to explore how terms are connected in various ways, such as how they collocate in a corpus. Some tools, such as Terms Radio, allow you to see a lot of terms at once. Other tools, like Scatterplot, are intended to assist with more sophisticated text analysis, such as correspondence analysis and principal component analysis. Finally, for now, let's not forget tools that are more playful, that are more about the proliferation of representations of text, about the pleasure of seeing text differently. Voyant is an engine that creates things to observe. It's up to the human to interpret what they see, keeping in mind the nature and limitations of the tools. Voyant is sometimes called the gateway drug to the digital humanities. You start playing with it, and you get hooked and want to do more. Thank you very much for listening, and please don't hesitate to contact us with any requests or bug reports that you may have. Have fun with Voyant Tools.
All right, so I think that is a nice introduction to Voyant Tools. So as you heard in the video, Voyant Tools is a suite of text analysis and visualization tools. So I think it's important that you understand those two elements. There are both analytical moments, I guess, in Voyant, and then also a lot of visualizations you can make. So those are, I guess, integrated ideas, but I kind of think of it as the analysis is the first step, and then the visualization tools is sort of a summation of the analysis, or when you're ready to go a step further, you found something interesting in the analysis and you want to share it. Although, of course, you can use the tools for analysis as well. So one really neat thing about Voyant is that it's an in-browser tool, which means that all you need is the URL of the tool to use it. So you don't have to download anything to your computer, although if you want to, you can run it locally. But that's kind of not something that you'd necessarily be doing as an introductory user. But if you are interested in that, we do have documentation on how to do that. And at its basis, it's a tool that allows you to upload a text that you can then explore. And that text I'm going to talk later in the presentation about what an electronic text is, but just to give you a really brief idea, that could be a text document on your computer. It could be a URL to a website. It could even be a PDF file, although those are a little bit trickier to work with. Also, it was developed by humanists for humanists, which is unique. A lot of tools that we're used to using in digital humanities were not necessarily developed by humanists. This one was, so a lot of the questions that Voyant is trying to answer or explorations that it is opening were designed for this kind of humanist inquiry. It's also free and open source, which is great, and it has a multilingual interface, which is very neat. It automatically detects the language that you upload your text in, and there's been a lot of work done getting it to be useful for many different languages. My background is in Russian, and I've used Voyant very successfully with Russian, so I can say that that's a great thing about it. And of course, it was designed in Quebec, so there's a lot of thought about the multilingual functionality of it. Okay, so when you go to Voyant, and I've put here a link, which I can also put in the chat. I'm going to just type that in real quick because I encourage you to go, of course, to the website as well. So I'm just going to type that in real quick. And this link is going to automatically open the Jane Austen corpus for you. You can also just go to voyanttools.org and then select the Jane Austen corpus. What I mean by that is when you go to the Voyant homepage, you'll see you have the option to open an existing corpus. Click Austen's novels, open, and then you are taken to the homepage of Voyant. So when you first open it, it might look a little overwhelming. There are different tools across the site, obviously. And it was really designed to be interactive and to be customizable. And what I mean by that is you can change what's in each window of the site. You can also view each of these windows on their own if this is overwhelming to you. So let's start with the first tool here, which is the Cirrus tool. I think this is one of the most popular tools and also one of the most immediately interesting visually. And you're probably familiar with word clouds at this point. So that's what this is, hence the name Cirrus. And basically what we're looking at here is terms in Jane Austen's novels that are used more frequently than others. And I'm going to talk in more detail about this tool later on. As we move across, we have the reader tool, which gives you the text that you've uploaded if you've uploaded a corpus. So this is really nice if you want to check something specific. For example, if you are looking at this word cloud of terms from Jane Austen and you think to yourself, for example, feelings is used 570 times and you want to know about some of those usages, you can type into this search for feelings 570 times, and then those occurrences of feelings will be highlighted in the text. Of course, when you have all of these novels of Jane Austen, that's quite a lot of text to go through, but that's a really nice way to refer back to the text that you've put into Voyant. Then we have the trends tool, which shows you the frequency of terms used across texts in this case. So for Jane Austen, we have all of the novels that she's written, and those are located here on the x-axis. So we see her first novel all the way through her last novel, Persuasion, and we can track the frequency of the most commonly used terms. So for Jane Austen, those are Mr., Mrs., said, miss, and think across those texts. And of course, this is automatically populated with the most commonly used terms in the text, but you can customize this as you wish. So for example, if you are not interested in the most frequently used terms, but rather we can go back to our example of feelings, you can search for that. And now we have an example of the relative use of feelings across Jane Austen's texts. And these are sorted chronologically. So the idea is that you'll be able to track usage over time. You can do a lot of different things with playing with this with your own texts. And you can also look at a single text and word usage across a single text. Okay, so then moving to the summary tool, that gives you a really nice overview about what you've uploaded. So for example, that tells us this corpus has 8 documents. So 8 novels in this case with many words and unique word forms. And then you have some nice information here about, for example, the longest document in the corpus. So Emma is the longest novel that she wrote. The shortest is Lady Susan. You've got information about vocabulary density, average words per sentence, the readability index, and most frequent words in the corpus. So there's a lot of things here, and I'm kind of going quickly through this because a lot of this, I think it makes more sense if you explore it on your own. And then over here, we have the contexts, which gives you a concordance of the most frequently used terms and their location in the text. So for example, we have the most commonly used term, Mr., and this is going to give you the place in the corpus where that term was found. So the document in this case, this term Mr. was found in the first novel. And you can see the context of that term. So basically, at its core, all of these tools are populated with the most commonly used terms. So that gives you kind of a sense of what you're going to see when you just open Voyant. And like I said, I know it's a little overwhelming because there is a lot here. One thing I want to point out is you can make the individual tools bigger by clicking on the lines on the bottom and the top of the panels. So if you want to just focus on the word cloud, for example, you can make that much bigger. You can also go to this export tool, and you can export these visualizations. You can also open them just in a new window. Okay, so does anyone have any questions from just this very brief overview of Voyant? Or as you've hopefully been clicking around on your own, if anything has come up initially that you're not sure about, you can put it in the chat or. Okay, so there's a question, how can you upload multiple texts? Okay, yes, so that is a very good question. Why don't I go through the process of uploading a text? Actually, that's something that we're going to go through in the presentation. So we will definitely get to how to upload multiple texts. Does it automatically trim out a really common words like the or a, and can you customize? Yes. So we are also going to talk about the stop word list. But quick answer is yes. There is a stop word list that filters out the most commonly used terms, and that is all customizable and editable. Sorry, let me go back to our Jane Austen corpus. So as you can see here, you would expect that the most commonly used words would be a and the, and obviously those aren't there. And I am going to go into much more detail about the stop word list. All right. So let's continue here. Okay, so I think it's very important that we all understand what an electronic text actually is, because after all, that's what Voyant is working with electronic texts, and how can you find one for use in Voyant. So an electronic text can be thought of as something as simple as just a string of words, like the sentence on this computer screen. That is an electronic text. It could also be a URL or a website. It could be a plain text file that can be read by your computer. So plain text is anything that ends in .txt. But it could even be a spreadsheet that contains different columns and that you would be able to extract that information in Voyant. So all of these things are considered electronic text, and all of them can be used in Voyant. So I'm going to go back to the beginning and show you how you would upload each of those types of texts. So Voyant allows you to work with all of the aforementioned things. A string, you can, if you so desire, just type in a text into this text box. Obviously, this isn't going to make a very interesting corpus. If I hit reveal, there's only 4 words, and yeah, not much going on there. But you could, if you had a shorter text, you could copy and paste it directly into that box. So let's go back to the opening page. Okay. If you want to work with a URL of a website, you can do that by just typing in the URL. So for example, you can create a corpus if you wanted to from CBC, usually works. Okay, well, perhaps you cannot just put in the, might need a more specific URL from that. But let's trying to think, does anyone have a URL that you would like to see in Voyant off the top of your head? Okay, well, I can take the Google Doc that I created to prepare for this presentation. I believe that that will work, and we can see what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to plug my computer in because I'm running a little low on batteries. A second. It's going to slow things down a bit until. Oh my goodness. All right, well, this is an unexpected result. All right, Andrew has given me a different URL to try. This is kind of one of the funny things about doing workshops like this. It never goes the way that you anticipate. And I guess if you do a Google Doc, you might get something a little bit crazy. All right, so let me try the full URL for CBC. And I should have introduced Andrew McDonald at the beginning of our presentation. He is the coder behind Voyant. So he is here answering technical questions of this nature. All right, so let's try the full URL and see if that gives us what we want. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. So here you can see we've created a corpus from the homepage of CBC. So we can see the most commonly used word is ago, presumably because that there's information about how long ago articles were published on the website. But as expected, Canada shows up rather large. Winter, Beijing, Olympic. So what's interesting about this is that even with this very short look at the word cloud, we kind of get an interesting sense of what's happening in Canada's news world. Olympic, that's not necessarily a word I would have anticipated being so prevalent. Curling, it's amusing to me. So anyway, you can have a lot of fun with this kind of thing, but I won't go on too much. So that's how you would upload a URL. If you wanted to have multiple websites, you would just put them on different lines when you go to upload your URL on that main Voyant page. So if you put them on separate lines, then you can upload separate URLs. I'm just going to look in the chat real quick. Oh yes, someone said they would have expected to see the word balloon. Yes, I would have too. can you tell it to group words like Canada and Canadas? That is a good question. Yeah, so you see here that there's Canada and Canadas, and those are technically, you might want it to consider both of those words. I'm going to turn to Andrew for that question, actually, because he probably can come up with the answer much faster than I can. Is that possible? Can you tell Voyant to make Canada and Canada's one term?
No, not if. No, not really. We do have categories, which we're still working on, where you can assign arbitrary categories to a list of words, but that won't necessarily in the Cyrus tool show Canada and Canada's as just Canada. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you for that. And then there's another question also about how you would go about excluding a go from the splash page. Yes, so that is going to be a question for the stop word list, which I'm going to talk about, but why don't I just answer this question now? So in order to edit the stop list, each of these tools has a little option button. It looks like a on-off switch. And if you click on that, you'll get a pop-up window that will allow you to edit the tool. So in this case, the Cirrus tool. And you see here we have stop words and auto detect. So Voyant will auto detect the language that your text is in, and then it will automatically apply a stop word list. So in this case, it's applied a English stop word list. If you click on this little caret, you can see you have options. So none, if you don't want any stop word list. So we can try that and see what happens. I'm just going to make this a bit bigger for myself. So if we have no stop word list, actually it didn't change it all that much in this case, but you can see now we have words like in, to, the letter 4, the number 4, the number 13. So that's if you have no stop word list. And then you'll also see we have some preloaded lists for different languages in the case that Voyant has incorrectly identified the language your text is in, although it's pretty good. And then there's also this new user-defined list. If you do that, that is going to create a whole new stop word list. So that would be if you want to create the list completely yourself. So you could put a go in this list, and then it's going to remove that a go. But you're going to see that you still have all of those little words. So if you want, you can also go to the auto detect list and then edit the list. This will allow you to see everything that's in the auto detected list. And so I would recommend most of the time you're going to want to edit the auto detected list so that you don't have all of these other really common stop words. And you can also delete words if there's something that you are interested in. So I'm going to add a go so that we can edit that out. And then let's say that for some reason you are very interested in whether or not nothing is present, you could delete that word. Save. And I should mention that there's this apply globally button here. That means apply across all of these different tools. So if you change the stop word list in the Cirrus tool, it's going to also apply that to all of these different panels, all the different tools in Voyant. So I'm going to go ahead and see what happens there. Okay, so now you can see that we have a nice updated list. We don't have the word ago because it's probably not very useful for our analysis. And yeah, so that's how you edit the stop word list. I'm just going to see.
Just a follow-up, because this was actually my question. My name is Camille.
For sure.
It actually didn't work. I uploaded a corpus and it just didn't work for me. Sorry.
Oh, okay. What kind of corpus were you trying to upload? Were you trying to upload a document or a URL or?
Yeah, a Word doc. Like I managed to upload the document. That's not the problem. It's the editing the word.
stop word list?
Yeah, exactly. But maybe you'll answer this question later on. So.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but hopefully we can figure out what happened there. And then I see there's a question about if you enter a URL that loads more content as you scroll, does it only pull from the view before you start to scroll? So I believe it will treat the entire page as one document. So I don't think the view from your scroll shouldn't matter. It's all the text that is on that page until you reach the end. But if there are things, if there's like a next page, like in the case of, I don't know, Amazon shopping, where you have to go to a 2 at the bottom to get more results, that would be a separate URL. So it's everything that is associated with that URL. So your scrolling shouldn't matter. And then there's one last question. Voyant indeed works with URLs, so it's not that I can update PDF files. For example, if we have a document. Yeah, okay, so Voyant works with URLs, but it also works with documents. And so this is a great lead in to what I wanted to show you next, which is how to upload different file types. So you can do typing in your text or URLs. You can also open the pre-existing corpora. At this point, there's just those 3. Most likely, though, you're probably going to want to upload your own corpora. So when you hit the upload button, you're going to get this usual file upload interface from your own computer. So here I have a couple different things on my computer, and I also have the Project Gutenberg ebook text of Anne of Green Gables as a .txt file. So all I have to do, and I hope you can see, I just realized you might not be able to see the file upload box because of the way I shared my screen, but it just looks like anytime you need to upload a file, if you can't see. You're just going to hit open your file, and then you'll see this fetching your corpus. And here we have my new corpus that I've just created, which is Anne of Green Gables. And I got this from the Project Gutenberg. Go back to my slides here. If you're not familiar with Project Gutenberg, there's a lot of great electronic text there that are in the common domain. So if you are just looking for text to play around with, that's a great place to start. You can also find electronic text using Internet Archive, and the Library of Congress has a really nice guide for that as well. So to go back to your question about uploading files. Yeah, so you can upload many different file types, .txt. You can also upload a Word doc, which would be the file extension for Word itself, which is escaping me at this moment. But you can also do PDFs. PDFs are probably the least ideal version of uploading a text for Voyant, however, because they don't always work the way that you want them to. So you can definitely upload PDFs, but it's definitely preferable to do a Word doc or a TXT document. And then I remember that someone had asked about uploading multiple documents to make a corpus, which you can definitely do. You just want to select multiple files when you go to your upload. So I just want to look at okay, so I see that Andrew has clarified, just to go back to the question about scrolling. If you scrolling loads more content than Voyant, will actually miss that. So I think I answered that incorrectly. So thank you, Andrew, for clarifying. Right, okay, so there's some discussion about that. So make sure that you read that if you are interested. Okay, and then I also want to point out that David Wilson has put in the chat a useful method for finding more electronic texts from Wikisource. So that's awesome. There's a great way to get plain text files. If there's a Wikipedia article that you would want to use in Voyant, or maybe not even just Wikipedia articles. Okay. So once you've uploaded your text or texts I'm showing you the Anne of Green Gables version here because that is a single document. So the first corpus that I showed you was all of Jane Austen's novels, and you saw that there were multiple texts, obviously, in that corpus. But you can also use Voyant for a single text, and then that's going to change the way that you interact with some of the tools. So for example, for the trends tool before, whereas we had on this x-axis all of Jane Austen's novels, now you can see that we have document segments. So what Voyant does is it takes your text and it automatically divides it into sections or segments, and you can change the number of segments that you want. The default is 10. So this gives you an idea of how a term is used across just this singular text. For example, if we look at the term Anne, we can see that it wasn't used very much in the first segment of this text, and then obviously the usage increased, presumably as the character Anne became introduced more throughout the text, and goes down a little bit towards the end of the text. So perhaps that's, you could think of something interesting to explore with that. You can also see that the term said is used pretty regularly across the text at a pretty common frequency, which makes sense. There's a lot of dialogue throughout this text, and it looks like that holds true throughout text. If you want, you can change the number of document segments that are here by, just like we edited the stop word list, we can go to define the options for the tool. And you can see here we have this segments button. So like I said, the default is 10, but let's say you want to drill down a little bit further and you want to actually see smaller segments, you can change that to 30 segments, and then we're going to see much more detail. The text is divided up into even smaller chunks. All right. So that is getting your texts or your electronic text into Voyant itself. And I should point out that you can also make your own electronic texts through processes like web scraping. You can use XML tables or just copy and paste. Voyant, it does a great job with tables. I'm not going to go too much into that right now. That's something that I can talk about more in the session on Thursday, working with text from tables. But you can tell Voyant which columns in your table to consider different what am I trying to say here? You can tell Voyant what parts of your table to consider your text. And then the worst case scenario for an electronic text is if you have a physical text that does not exist in an electronic form, then to get it into Voyant, you would need to scan that text and then perform OCR, which is optical character recognition, basically telling the computer that the letters that you've scanned are indeed letters. Or you might have to retype it. Obviously, you would only do that if you had a very short text or something that, I guess, that was your only option and you were very dedicated to creating an electronic version. Luckily, with sites like Project Gutenberg, a lot of this work has been done for you, especially if you're looking at older materials. The newer things are going to be harder to find, like newer novels. That would be a case where that could be tricky, although with electronic books, that is one option that you could use. For example, when I was writing my dissertation, I had to create electronic versions of a lot of popular memoirs. And that was actually fairly easy because I could just use the Kindle version of those texts and just through a little bit of finagling, get them into a format that could be converted to TXT. So anyway, that's kind of a tangent, but it is possible. All right. Okay, so the next question we're going to talk about is what do you need to do to get your text ready to go into Voyant? So as you saw with my Anne of Green Gables corpus here, I didn't really do anything to this text besides download it from Project Gutenberg. And as you can see here in the word cloud, we can see that there's some things we probably don't want in the word cloud based on the fact that I didn't edit out any of this beginning material. So for example, all of the Project Gutenberg's texts have this long preamble about what you can do with the text. So that's going to, impact your corpus. And I actually don't see an example on the word cloud here. I assumed that we would see the word Gutenberg, as you can see here in this Macbeth corpus that I included on this slide, but here we see Gutenberg has come up. We can also see the word electronic because of the prevalence of that Gutenberg electronic text preamble. We see the word project. So we can just use the stop word list to edit out all of these terms, but we can also just clean up our text before we upload it to Voyant. So it's kind of a little bit of a dance between how much work do you want to do ahead of time before using Voyant to get your text ready versus how much do you want to do in Voyant to edit what you've uploaded. But probably the best practice is going to be to get a version of the text that's as clean as you can that only has the text itself. So you're going to want to get rid of anything that isn't the text that you actually want to analyze. So in the case of this Project Gutenberg text, I would just need to open up my TXT file and delete the relevant passages at the beginning and end from Project Gutenberg that I don't want to include. All right. So oops, go back here. Another thing that you want to consider as you're uploading your text into Voyant and getting your text ready for Voyant is going to be looking at the encoding of that text. If you're working in a language other than English, you want to make sure that Voyant can actually read your text. Otherwise, Voyant does a really good job of identifying where words start and end. So that's not something that you're going to have to do ahead of time. If you're familiar with the idea of tokenizing a text, Voyant will do that automatically. So that's one of the great things. So really, to get your text ready for Voyant, it shouldn't be too arduous of a process, especially if you kind of just want to play around with your text. So even though I have all of this Project Gutenberg stuff here, and for example, all of these chapter names, you'd probably want to delete those because chapter might be disproportionately represented in the number of, in the word usage. It might show up as the chapter is very frequently used in this text, which is true, but that's not necessarily something that you will, that's useful for your analysis. But even though we have all of this material, we still can see some interesting things in our visualization here and in these different tools. And I want to mention, again, thinking about customizing these different tools, thinking about the stop word list, I should point out that you can also create what's called a whitelist. So if you only want to consider certain terms, you can make that kind of list. And with the Cirrus tool, you can also change the font. For example, if you want to use this in like a conference poster or something like that, and you can also change the color palette. So there's some fun, just visual things you can play around with. Whoa. Okay, well, that's not really the design choice that I would personally go with, but it does change how you look at the text a little bit. Okay, I just see, I think there's some conversation in the chat about apostrophe usage. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about with encoding a little bit. One thing when you're working with electronic text, you do have to think about how do you actually, how is the computer reading what's typed? And there's a question about the different kinds of apostrophes and how Voyant would consider those. So if you're interested, look at them. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is going beyond just the mechanics of using Voyant. What would you actually want to use Voyant for? And how would you design a simple text analysis project? Because at its core, it's very fun to see what the most commonly used words are in a text and to play around with these tools. But ultimately, we want to, go a step further and actually do some analysis. And so in order to do this, you're first going to need to develop a corpus. And a corpus is just one or more texts that are unified by some criterion that's relevant to your research. So if you want to develop a corpus, you're first going to need to think about what you want to study. And then you're going to want to frame some questions and develop some hypotheses. So for example, we have go back to our CBC corpus here. If I wanted to work with this corpus, I might say to myself, okay, I want to compare how CBC is reporting on things versus the New York Times. So maybe my corpus is going to be the homepage of the CBC landing page and the New York Times landing page. And I'm going to put both of those into Voyant and kind of see comparatively how they are comparing things. So let's actually do that since we have capability. And this way I can show you as well how to put in two different URLs. Okay, so if you enter them both on two different lines, okay, I'm going to have to look up the New York Times URL real quick. Okay, .com, that makes sense. All right, so you put in your two different URLs. Okay, and now we can have more of a comparison. So for example, if we go to our trends tool, you can see that we have CBC and we have the New York Times, and we're looking at the most commonly used terms here. Now, we would definitely need to do some work with the stop word list because we've got read, minutes, New York, and Times. So this is not very interesting for our analysis. So I'm going to go to our stop word list. I'm going to edit the automatically created list, and I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of New York Times, as well as read and minute. Oh, and I should have go ahead and put a go as well. And one thing I should point out, once you've saved your stop word list, if you've edited the preloaded stop word list, you might feel like your terms have disappeared, but they haven't disappeared. It's just that this list automatically puts the words you add into alphabetical order. So don't feel like your terms disappeared if you click on it again. They've just gone into the alphabetical order. Okay. So let's go here to our trends. I want to reset this so that our new stop word list is applied here. Okay, so now, well, we can see that we'd have to drill down a little bit more because we're still working with some stop words that would need to be eliminated. But let's do a search. Let's say we're interested in the balloon. Okay, so we can see that CBC has not talked about balloons, whereas the New York Times has mentioned that twice. So it's not the most interesting example. Could also look at something like Canada. Not surprisingly, CBC is using Canada far more than the New York Times. Okay, so once we've done a little bit of exploration, we've created our corpus. We need to think of some questions and develop some hypotheses. So I kind of just did that with thinking about, how does the New York Times and CBC, how are they referencing current events? Then you want to figure out what evidence you would need to answer those questions. So is it going to be just word usage, or am I going to look at something more in depth? For example, am I going to look at how words are used in correlation with one another? We could look at the correlations tool for that. Again, this maybe wasn't the greatest example because these two corpora are not having the most terms. But so I want to ask you all if you have any ideas of something in your own work, a corpus that you might be able to create, and what kinds of questions you think you might be able to answer using Voyant about that text. So does anyone want to volunteer an idea that you might have about a text that you would use in Voyant, and then like what kind of a question could you answer from that text? You can either put it in the chat, or also you could just raise your hand. Katerina.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm thinking of using Voyant for so what we are looking at right now is the messaging, the Canada federal government's messaging around Arctic security in comparing of the messaging, sorry, when it was at the time of the Ukraine crisis, so 2013, 2014, and with the messaging, what came out since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So we are looking at federal government messaging, which are available in the archive and in the more recent documents. And this is what I would be using Voyant for specifically, and then kind of trying to better understand what were some of the main topics. For example, what the federal government was referring to, were they, for example, when they were talking about Arctic security, were they, for example, referring to the situation in Ukraine?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds like a fascinating project. And I think Voyant would definitely be a great tool for that, especially because you would be able to very quickly compare those two different corpora of texts. And I think you've totally identified a great analysis project here, and shown, you know, which questions you might be asking. And then in terms of on the slide, I have written here, identify what evidence you would need to answer those questions. So that would be those documents in the federal archives. And then gathering the evidence would just be gathering and compiling those documents. Digitizing them, I'm assuming they're already digitized, which makes your life easier, cleaning them up, and then kind of putting them into Voyant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. No, that sounds really interesting. And obviously very pertinent to, you know, what's happening in the world today. And then I see a hand from Alexandra.
Hi. So a project that I'm working on, I'll be using this, uploading an Excel spreadsheet. And so I have a list of people with short biographies attached to each name. So what I want to do is look at those biographies and get an idea of what kind of work they did, what kind of volunteer work they were involved in, kind of group, see how how often those sort of things show up. My question to you is, can I use Voyant to do that, but keeping the biographies attached to the name?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of uploading spreadsheets, let me go to yet another new Voyant page. So when you go to upload your text, I should have had a spreadsheet in mind, but I believe that I have yeah, I just need to navigate to a spreadsheet on my computer so that I can show you this. Okay. So oops, I always do this. All right, so I'm going to go back because we want to show you how to instruct Voyant how to read your spreadsheet. So when you're on the home page, you go to the options button again. And here you'll see that you have all of these different options for inputting different kinds of text. So you have a corpus option. I'm not going to touch on that too much right now. You have your text option. This is also very helpful. You can omit until or omit after a certain moment in your text. So going back to that Project Gutenberg message that I was talking about, I could actually have just told Voyant to omit everything until the beginning of the text. But we want to look at tables. So if you go to tables, you can tell Voyant which part of your table to consider a document. So in essence, if you have a column on your table that's the biographies, you could tell it you want an entire row or an entire column, and then you are going to you can tell it whether or not you have headers, and then you would specify which column or which row your content is in that spreadsheet. And then you have this option for author and title. So that might be what you're getting at with the with connecting the names of the people who've written the biographies. But
it's actually the biographies are about the people. So I have a list of people with their biographies. Like there are only a few sentences. It's a list of award winners.
Okay.
So, but and I want to keep the name attached to the biography.
Right.
Or
I'm not. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I will turn to Andrew too to think about whether or not that's possible. Off the top of my head, I'm not totally sure how you do it unless you included the name
in the text,
right, in the column itself.
Right. Okay. But in a more general way, I'd be able to use Voyant to at least get an idea of how many times someone, or how many times an occupation like a person in the military or a politician would show up by looking at those words.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, for sure. So I can show you real quick. I'm going to say for my table, I don't remember what is even in this table necessarily, but I can just say, we're going to look at the second column and see what happens. You hit OK, and then I go to upload. And we'll see. We'll see what was in the second table, the second column. Okay, so this was something from my dissertation. It is a column of names, or it is a column that had names and dates. So not very interesting, but right. So anyway, there's a lot that you can do with working with tables, and the documentation around this on Voyant is really good in kind of spelling out how to do that more concretely. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That sounds like a really interesting project. All right. So moving on, I wanted to look at a specific example of kind of what you can do with Voyant more concretely when you're looking at a text. And I'm going to look at Frankenstein here, which I have open somewhere. At this point, I have quite a few of these Voyant pages. Okay, so here is Frankenstein, the text of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So the first thing that we can ask when we open a new corpus in Voyant, we can ask just broadly, what is the text about? So that's something that Voyant can kind of quickly show you potentially. In the case of, all right, I'm just going to close a few of these because I have to keep clicking through all of them. Okay, so in the case of our Frankenstein text, if you were just looking at the word cloud, what do you think that this text would be about? That's like a really good place to start. Obviously, we all probably are familiar with what the text is about, but if you've never read it, you might be surprised at kind of what picture this paints of the text. We can see that man is featured very heavily, as well as father, death, night. So already we can kind of get a sense for maybe some genre affiliations, kind of in the Gothic world with death and night. But we also see heart featured prominently. We see deer. So just at its core, we can kind of start asking, okay, like, what is this text about if we're just looking at the most frequently used terms? But then we can also begin to think about specific terms. So if there's something that you're interested in specifically, like friendship, you can start searching for that term itself. So we can look at, and I haven't shown you this document terms tool yet. Oops, make that big again. Document terms just shows you all of the terms used in the text, as well as how frequently they're used, the count, and then their relative frequency. And then you have this nice trend line that shows you that term used across the text. So Voyant has some pretty robust capabilities for searching for specific terms. So I can look for friendship. If I put the wild card after it, I can look for all the instances of friendship, as well as any term that contains friendship. So that would include friendships. And if you hover over this question sign here, you'll see all of the different query options for a term. So there are quite a few of them. I'm not going to go through them all, but you can do a lot if you want to find. And this kind of answers the question about Canada and Canadas. If you wanted to search for them as one term here, you could do that by doing, obviously this is a different corpus, so we're not going to have the word Canada in Frankenstein, I don't think. But we could, if you wanted to search for fathers, for example, and if you wanted to make father and fathers one term, you would do father in the wild card, and now you'll get all the instances of that term. So we can start to ask questions about, okay, well, what does it mean that friendship is used only 7 times in this text? Maybe we want to go to the reader to look for where that specifically was used, or maybe we want to look at the contexts of where friendship was used in the text. So we can type in this search box here, again, friendship. Sorry, I have to move the Zoom panel. I don't think you can see that on your end, but we can see exactly where friendship is used with these concordances here. So you can kind of get a sense of how you can start to play with Voyant and kind of develop, a story about your text. We can also ask ourselves what words in the Cirrus word cloud make sense and what words are anomalous. So to go back to the word cloud, I guess I already identified myself some terms that made sense to me. Does anyone see any that you think are anomalous or that kind of, jump out to you as being interesting for analysis? I'm just looking through them to see if there's any that I think are, that kind of are surprising. I guess it's interesting to me how eyes is featured so heavily. That could be kind of an interesting thing. Soon, someone has said soon. Yeah, that could be an interesting moment for analysis too. Like, why is soon featured so much? Is that just a writing style? Does Mary Shelley just use that term very frequently because of her style, or is there something more significant? Feelings? Yeah, like how are feelings being used throughout this text? And are we looking at human feelings or feelings as in like textures? So you get a sense of kind of how you can go about asking questions. And then we also have here looking at how the language changes over time in the text, which I showed you a little bit with the trends tool. But this is something that we can see, for example, if we want to look at friendship again across the text, or actually let's do one of the examples. Let's do soon. So if we look at the usage of the term soon throughout the text, we can see that it's pretty constant across the text, but it does look like there's a big increase towards the end. So maybe you go to those instances and you can build a story about that. Or feelings you can look at as well. So it looks like there are some sections of the text where feelings are used more heavily than others. So that's, again, something else that you could kind of begin to think about. Okay, so enough of me talking. Right now, I invite you to upload a text. I put on here that you have prepared, but obviously that I don't expect you to have prepared a text. Any text that you have on your computer, one fun thing that you can do if you have your own writing, you can always upload that. That can actually be a very instructive exercise to kind of figure out what terms you're using. And so you can always just upload a Word document of your own writing. And once you've gotten it into Voyant, you can look at what are the most frequently used terms in your corpus and try to figure out how you would find where they're used in your text. And then we can talk about these next questions after people have had a chance to upload their text. So yeah, I invite you to either upload a text or put in a URL that interests you, and we can kind of play around a little bit more. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can give other people a chance to share if you come across something interesting. Okay, so I'm not sure if I've given people enough time. It's always hard to tell online. But does anyone wish to share something interesting that they found with a document that you've uploaded? You don't have to share your screen either. You can just share verbally. Or also, I should say, did anyone have any challenges uploading a text or any questions just about, getting your text into Voyant?
Well, I was the one responsible for the question about the apostrophe, and I remain frustrated by it because I can't exclude G in French. But that might just be me. So you need a straight apostrophe, and I just can't figure it out.
Oh no.
It's okay.
Yeah, it can be hard. Yeah, the different language ways the different characters are written can definitely be a challenge. Like I said, I've done a lot of work in Russian, and that can be definitely challenging just with the encoding. But it looks like there's some discussion in the chat, so hopefully that's something. I know there's a parallel French version of this workshop being run, so I wonder if that's a question
It's really tough
they
one.
would be able to answer.
It's really a tricky problem because we have so many different character sets to represent all the, even just the European languages that use generally the same character set. For some reason, we've generated tons of these. So Unicode can give you all kinds of characters that look identical. And it actually causes some real big problems on our HPC side of things at the Alliance, because people copy and paste these things into scripts that are going to be parsed by computers all the time. And I wish I could say there's an easy solution. There's a number of ways you can scan through your text to look for characters that maybe are looking like they're the character you think they are, but aren't. But it is kind of a tricky problem.
Can I?
Go
I work on orthography work with Kwakala which is a West Coast indigenous language, and I've written sort of an orthography converter between the different ones. But because of the way it works, it actually if you convert one from one orthography to itself, it actually normalizes the text. So there might be some way to do that. There's probably some sort of tool online similar to that. But part of the problem is that there's also different ways to represent like the same character. Like accent aigu can be represented as just one code point, or it can be represented as E plus the combining acute accent code point. So yeah, you'd probably want to find some tool for normalizing the text like that.
I'm glad that at least my apparently simple question is actually a bigger one.
Yeah, it's funny how those small things can end up actually being like quite challenging problems. And I think it's a good illustration of how like computers think so differently than humans, even though we can sometimes think that difference isn't there. So there's a question from David about declensions and conjugations for like highly inflected languages. And actually, I'm going to share the corpus that you uploaded just because I think it's interesting and kind of shows you how.
Yeah, I expected there to be more common phrases because I know that like there's a lot of commonly repeated phrases throughout the Iliad, but
oh, sure.
But I mean, the most common phrase it lists only has a count of 7, which does not sound right at all.
That's interesting. Yeah, so this is the Iliad, and I'm assuming that you. Let's
I mean, part of the problem is it still contains, I just downloaded it directly, so it still contains the line number, so that might be part of it.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so thinking about inflected languages where, yeah, the conjugations or the declensions are going to mess things up. I've definitely thought about that problem a lot with Russian. And in terms of Voyant solving it, so what you could do is before you upload your text to Voyant, you could kind of put in the legwork and lemmatize the text. So essentially take every form of the words that, like, so for nouns, every declension would be, you know, the base form. And then Voyant would count it as one thing. That's probably what I would do. And then there's, or you could also, or yeah, you lematize it so that the nouns and the verbs are in their base forms and the adjectives, depending on what you're looking at. Voyant, yeah, can't really do that particular thing.
I mean, yeah, just as I was thinking about, like, one possible feature would be if you had, like, say, a large database of all the nouns and their various declensions, you could use that to find phrases by matching up words with their declension. Like, say, like, if a sentence contains these two words in the same case, it could be seen as an example of one phrase or word phrase. It's just a possible.
Yeah.
That would be one extent.
Right.
Because if you just lemmatize it, then you lose, because of the way these languages aren't often as ordered as in English, you would probably lose a lot of the information about which words correspond.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, I think it's an interesting question, like what's the best way to work with those kinds of languages where there is so much information in those endings that you don't necessarily want to lose. Yeah, but awesome. That is really cool. All right, so I'm going to go.
Quick
yeah,
question.
Go ahead.
What does readability index mean?
That is a great question. Let me find. That's in the summary.
Yes.
Okay. Readability index.
I can answer that. So that's actually Voyant is open source, and we had an outside group that was doing studying texts, their readability, and they contributed this code to calculate readability of texts. It uses so you can see there's various algorithms to determine a text's readability, and this one is using the Coleman-Liao algorithm. So you can read more about that on Wikipedia or any other number of places.
Thank you.
All right, so in the remaining time that we have, I do want to show you some of the more interesting visualizations that Voyant can do. So right now, up to this point, I've pretty much focused on more of the analytical moments on Voyant, but I should point out that Voyant also has a lot of visualization tools as well. So I'm going to just reload this Frankenstein corpus so that you kind of are back to the default view. So if you go to this link, which I can put in the chat, this is all of the tools that Voyant has. So each panel on this homepage can be thought of as a tool. And this is a comprehensive list of all of the tools, although I should say that some of them are grouped together. And what I mean by that is, for example, you have summary, documents, and phrases here are kind of in one place. So let me put this in the chat, this link to the documentation about all the tools. But as you can see, there are a lot of really interesting visual tools. For example, if we go back here, we can look at the bubble lines tool, which is a visual representation of terms in the text based on how frequently they're used and when they're used in the text. Whether or not, you know, some of them are meant to be a little bit more playful, some of them would require finessing before, you know, personally, to me, this isn't really telling me much with the way that this visualization is automatically, but we can certainly For example, we can look for different terms and maybe find something interesting there. We also have the visual tool terms vary, which shows you how terms interact with each other. So for example, we can look at a term like friend and see all the terms that are used in conjunction with friend and how frequently they're used. And you can change with this term, with this tool, excuse me, you're looking at the words used on either side of friend, and you can kind of customize that, how far out you want to look on either side of that term. So that is another one of the visual tools that we have. There is also links, which is somewhat similar to terms vary, but this is showing you words that are used together. So we can look and see that father is used with Geneva, entered, Elizabeth, thought, and you can also move these around. They're interactive. You can search for your own terms here. So that's another cool thing that is available as well. There is also, let me show you how to find these here. Back in Voyant, if you click on this little window on any of the tools, this will allow you to go to this visualization tools. So you'll see a list of all the different visualization tools that you could open here. And someone had asked about place names. So I wanted to show you this Dreamscape tool. And I actually am going to open it bigger. All right, so you can always export any one of these tools into its own window if you want to see it bigger. So Dreamscape uses named entity recognition to identify place names in a text. My computer is probably going to be a little slow at this because it's getting tired having all these things open. But essentially, this is a cool tool that would allow you to see where place names are referenced in a text. It is still a little bit experimental, and of course, there's always going to be some challenges with named entity recognition and place names, names that are in more than one place. There's a lot of cities, especially in North America, that are named after European cities. So that can be a challenge, but hopefully this loads so you can see it. But anyway, that is another cool tool that we have. And I guess I loaded it on the Iliad, which is probably why it is chugging along so slowly. So let me see if I can use Frankenstein. That is probably going to be easier to see. Our visualization tools, Dreamscape. There we go. All right, so I'm going to show you this bigger. Yeah, so you can see that the different place names in that text are being referenced. And up here, you can see quickly where in the text. So we have Vicar of Wakefield, Journey to Ingersoll. Again, is this Melbourne in Florida the right Melbourne? Well, I don't think that, I don't think Melbourne, Florida was featured heavily in Frankenstein. So you're gonna have to play with it a little bit. And we're still kind of working on this, but there's a lot of promise here as well. All right. Yeah, so I invite you to play around with these. Like I said, some of them are a little bit more playful than others. But all right, so we are nearing the end of our time here. I did want to point out that there is more help available on the tools page. Well, I guess I already shared that link with you actually, but The documentation for Voyant is also located on that site. So a lot of what I've talked about here, you can reference on this guide, and this is very helpful for finding out more information. And I just want to address one other question about saving your work. So right now, there's no accounts for Voyant, but you definitely do not have to re-upload your corpus every time. What you can do is once you've created the corpus, all you need to do is remember the URL, and this unique identifier is going to be your corpus identifier. So you can reference this corpus at any time just using this URL. So you just want to save that somewhere. If you've done a lot of work like customizing things like the stop word list and things like that, that is not something that you can save at the moment. However, we are working on Spiral notebooks, which is kind of an extension of Voyant that makes saving all of those things possible. So if you're interested in that, I would definitely recommend coming to the session on Thursday, because we're going to go into much more detail about saving your work that way.
I just want to address that quickly. You can, if you customize the stop word list, that you can save that.
Oh, great.
If you have it applied globally and then click OK, it will modify the URL and add a keywords parameter to the URL. And then when you go back to that URL, it will load up the corresponding stop list.
Oh, amazing. Okay, so yeah, if you this apply globally button is what Andrew's talking about, and that is automatically selected. Yeah, so that is great. It's obviously if you spend a lot of time creating a stop word list, it's annoying to have to re-specify that. Does anyone have any other questions that we can answer at this time?
What's the session on Thursday?
So it's called Exploring Voyant and Spiral, I believe, or using Voyant and Spiral. So it's basically, I'm going to go through a little bit of what I did with Voyant today, but we're going to go into more detail about actually using the different tools. And then I'm going to talk about Spiral notebooks, which are an extension, like I said, of Voyant. It's a notebook environment. So basically it's a way to do more advanced analysis with the tools in Voyant, as well as to save things in kind of a notebook format. Yeah, so that is on Thursday. There'll probably be a little bit of repetition, just because I'm anticipating people might need a refresher or whatever, but you can certainly come to that and kind of just have the first bit about Voyant, going in the background, and then focus on Spiral when I shift to that about halfway through. Okay, any other questions?
I'll just mention that if you have questions afterwards, you can email me with any questions or issues at voyanttools@gmail.com. I put that in the chat. So yeah, feel free to message me, send me an email about whatever.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew, for being so helpful and for being so willing to answer questions. All right, well, if no one has any more questions, I just want to say thank you all so much for attending and for being such a lively audience. Like, it was really nice to have some feedback and participation. Sometimes, it's just much more fun to lead these sessions when people are willing to share what they're working on. And we had some really lively discussion in the chat as well. So thank you so much. This was really fun. And I hope to see some of you all on Thursday. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the series.